taking the time to come and listen and to contribute to my journey as well, as I am progressing through my doctoral study at a DUT. And when the call came for this conference, I sat there and I thought, so what do I talk about, and how do I say something that is linked to my doctoral study as well as something that contributes it, and how do we tie these things in? And one of the earlier speakers said, if you Google risk and if you Google resilience, it's very hard to find anything and work through it. And yeah, so for myself, I thought to myself, well, part of my doctoral study has led me to examine who I am in higher education. And then I said, so what is the risk of being who I am in higher education, and therefore the title of my presentation. But maybe also just to add to say that as part of my doctoral study, I've been working with academic staff who use games for learning, who are risk takers, taking very big risks using games in higher education environment. Because as we went through and I did my data collection, a lot of the students kind of said, you know, this games thing is just not for higher education. We do serious stuff in higher education. We don't play games. And then it made me think as well for myself. So where did I come upon this game playing? How did I start thinking about game playing? And what is it in me, myself and I, that's linked to game playing? What do I need to understand? And then, so that is why I decided to start looking at who is the self and who is the risk of them being the self in higher education. So let's, just to put it into context then, all higher education learners, according to the HEQC criteria, according to SACWA's critical cross-field outcomes, all higher education learners should be self-directed, autonomous learners who are able to solve problems and think critically, amongst a whole lot of other things that they need to be. And this is the context that we find ourselves. And of course, the immediate question for me was, so, if I need to be self-directed, autonomous, I'm a doctoral student, am I self-directed? Am I autonomous? What does it take to get me? And then I reached the point where I asked myself the question, so who is the self in the self-directed learning? Because if the learners need to be self-directed, I think it's very important for us to understand then two issues. One, who is the self? And second, what does it mean to be, what does self-directed learning mean? And I'm just reminded of, on Tuesday I attended the workshop and Isak Brewer spoke about the alphabet of learning. And for many of us, we can think about the alphabet of learning. A, of active learning. B, we could think of something, blended learning. C, we could think of, come on, let's hear.
Contextual learning.
Contextual, collaborative, cooperative. D, you've heard of D? Deep learning, okay? Okay, we can go, you've heard of e-learning?
Yes.
Yeah, and then we can go to F. The F word.
Formative.
Fun, formative, flexible learning.
Flexible.
We can go right up to Z. Zero learning. Okay, so then I said to myself, so what is self-directed learning then? And looking at the work of Marcel Jousse, wrote a book and he says, be yourself. And as part of that book he says, okay, the way that we can be ourselves best is actually if we are orientators. In other words, he said we need to be able to orientate ourselves. We need to have the correct perspective. We need to face things from a correct perspective. We need to orientate, to turn, to move. You know, we talk about first year orientation. We need to orientate myself. So in terms of self-directed learning, I started reflecting and saying, as a doctoral student then, to what extent am I orientated within my study? Are my toes pointing in the right direction to understand my study for what it is? And really, I need to be a direction finder, and quite often at a doctoral level, that's what we expect. But actually we expect it from all our learners, not only at a doctoral level. We expect our learners to have some of that. And it led me to I actually enjoyed what he wrote here, where he says, to direct is to take by the hand and lead according to a predetermined plan. And so often we get hooked on the plan, and we think of what the plans are, and we want everything to fit into the plan. And sometimes things go wrong. And how do we determine, how do we evaluate what is actually happening? So to be self-directed means I need to have a plan, I need to be working through something. Where does that plan come from? A predetermined plan. What influences that plan? And those are some of the issues that we needed to grapple with. And if we think of our own learners, our first year, if we're going to first year experience, our own first year learners, what is their predetermined plan? And it led me to go and to tell my story and to say, so what was my story? What influenced my plan, where I'm going? And Maslow as well talks about we need to become critically aware of what has been taken for granted in one's own learning. And I think quite often as lecturers, as academic developers, we forget about our own learning and who we are and where we came from and what we are actually all about. So we need to become critically aware of our own learning, and therefore I thought to take you on a journey through that. But before we go on the journey, I'd like to just share with you something from Krishnamurti, 1953. And to highlight the fact that he says, relying on books and knowledge and authority to give him understanding. Understanding comes only through self-knowledge. And for me, I interpret that self-knowledge is if I know who I am, and I know where I am from, and what I have achieved and how I've achieved it. And maybe for me that's part of what risks have I taken? What is the resilience that I have shown to be where I am and to be embarking on this doctoral study? Linked to that as well is the work by Claudia Mitchell and Sandra Weber, who looks at self-study, autobiographical learning. And these are the questions that we ask in determining ourselves. How does our past experience play into who we are and how we teach today? And I think our keynote speaker this morning said we need to ask ourselves, how do we reinvent ourselves and when do we start? Now, to reinvent yourself, Mitchell says, how can we revisit or use the past? Because to be able to reinvent ourselves, we got to know where we came from, because we're reinventing. So what were we invented as initially? For us to reinvent. So therefore we need to go back.